presidential election campaign.
We here in Philadelphia are pretty clued in. We're a pretty political city. There's actual excitement.
The stage is set for both candidates. It is the first debate for Harris, but not for Trump. He took part in the first presidential debate on June 27th, hosted by CNN in Atlanta against President Joe Biden. It's now just after 8 p.m. in Philadelphia. We're less than 60 minutes away from the candidates taking the stage. Joining us right now, CBC News chief correspondent Adrienne Arsenault will be live tonight for the simulcast of the ABC News presidential debate in Philadelphia. Our pre-debate coverage begins at the bottom of this hour, leading into a special edition of The National. And joining Adrienne for post-debate analysis and insight is U.S. correspondent Paul Hunter. And watching for us from Washington is CBC's Richard Madden. We're going to go to Paul first. Paul, it's good to have you back here. The rally continues behind you as now we're sort of in this countdown mode, if you will. Less than an hour now before both candidates get to the podium. But give us a sense now, what has the mood changed? Certainly there's more energy perhaps in the city leading up to this debate.
Yeah, but not quite what you might think. The noise that has really stepped up in the last hour or so. It's a Palestinian rally, mixing now with sort of pro-Jesus demonstrators, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-Kamala Harris, anti-Kamala Harris. There's a truck over there with going on about Trump and Project 2025. There's security barriers everywhere, police everywhere. Just another Tuesday in Pennsylvania, I suppose, in this political season. I heard the clip off the top, the woman saying that Philadelphia is, I'm not sure what she said, dialed in. That's what it feels like. We got here Sunday, indeed, talked to a bunch of voters who said, interestingly enough, a lot of the talk about the debate tonight is sort of the entertainment value, to be blunt about it. Who's going to punch harder kind of thing. But what we heard from a lot of voters here in Philadelphia was they want to learn, right? Especially from Kamala Harris. They want to know more about her. Look, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. People still don't know an awful lot about her. She's had her big convention, made the big speech, done a number of rallies, done the big sit-down interview. But tonight is the first chance for her to be kind of an hour and a half unscripted with a formidable opponent just a couple of meters away from her on the stage. What we heard from voters who already know about Donald Trump, love him or hate him, they told me what they want to do is they want to hear from Kamala Harris tonight. They want to see how she responds to Trump's jabs, want to hear what she has to say about her policies. And the undecideds that we met, if you can believe it, there are still undecided voters in America, a tiny sliver of them. They want to know more before they cast their vote. And tonight is the biggest and best chance for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump to get their messages out to those few remaining undecideds. They figure 50 million watched the Biden-Trump debate. They figure it'll be more than that tonight. Incredible.
Yeah, it is going to be quite incredible. And as you point out, a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts that are out there, many, and we lean towards the undecided as well, wanting to know, could this be their decision? We're actually going to be speaking to someone later on in our show who's sort of weighing in on which direction she wants to go in. But if we, as you mentioned, people know Donald Trump. They know what they're going to expect from him from this debate. Talk to us a little bit more, Paul, if you can, in terms of what specifically, if they told you they're looking from Kamala Harris. I mean, this will be her moment, as you pointed out, for her to really sort of stand strong and show herself as a leader, her first official debate in this presidential race. So what have they told you?
Her first official debate in this presidential race. It's the first time she will have debated Donald Trump. It's the first time Donald Trump and Kamala Harris will meet. Think about that when they walk out on stage. There is no love lost between these two. People suggest privately that Donald Trump despises her. We've heard the things that he has said at his rallies about her. There is, the suggestion that it's more vulgar behind the scenes. There is no love lost whatsoever. The dynamic between the two will be something to watch. How aggressive will they be against each other? Will Donald Trump take the bait if Kamala Harris puts it out, trying to goad him into showing an ugly side that has emerged at different times? What will she say to questions about policy, the knock against Harris so far has been, despite the fact that she has rejuvenated Democrats and basically made it a dead heat at this point, what will she respond? How will she respond to questions on policy? And as she's been criticized in the past for the flip-flops that she's made, specifically here in Pennsylvania. She came out against fracking a long time ago. Very important part of the economy of this state. We'll see how she responds to those things. It's going to be a show.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. But the stakes could not be higher. The contest is so tight right now. It is so close. 55 days only until the election. Effectively, it's tomorrow in so many ways, right? Stakes couldn't be higher. The White House hanging in the balance. It's going to be something to watch.
It is certainly indeed 90 minutes, as you say, of pure entertainment in some ways. Paul, thank you so much for this. CBC's Paul Hunter for us in Philadelphia. Let's shift over to Washington now, where we find our Richard Madden. Richard, great to see you. And I know you're going to be keeping a close eye now. 90 minutes of so much we're going to pull away the layers on. But talk to us about the importance of tonight for each of these candidates.
Yeah, Paul summed it up. I mean, you could not get higher stakes in this debate. And just let's think about this. Zoom out for a moment. 75 days ago was the last presidential debate, and we saw what happened. Joe Biden bombed, and that triggered his replacement by Kamala Harris. She's had, in just under 2 months, she's taken over the party. She's had her convention. She's had one sit-down interview, and now she's preparing for perhaps the most critical debate of her political career. So the stakes could not be higher. And as Paul also pointed out, she's also under tremendous pressure. Several polls suggest between 3 to 4 Americans still don't really know what she stands for. So I suspect we're going to see Trump really trying to tie her to the unpopular policies of the Biden administration. He's probably going to go after her on things like the rising inflation rates, the economy, and immigration. So all this, as polls suggest, a tightening race. Both candidates are under tremendous pressure to perform well and win. But it's the economic anxieties that Trump advisors are saying he's going to lean into. He's being urged not to go off script, not to avoid the personal attacks and the barrage of lies that Harris is expecting. I want you to listen to one of Trump's top officials laying it out this morning. Take a listen.
He has to focus on the issues most important to voters. He has to focus on what he has focused on primarily throughout the whole campaign trail, talking about bringing down inflation, talking about securing that southern border, and making sure that he holds Kamala's feet to the fire.
Now, Harris's advisors say she will present a positive vision for the country. But as I noted earlier, she does expect Trump to launch personal attacks and an onslaught of lies. So her challenge is to present her vision. But I also know that her advisors are hoping for some viral moment where Harris confronts the former president. Take a listen to a top Democrat.
Vice President Harris is going to articulate a forward-looking, inclusive agenda to make life better for everyday Americans and create a clear contrast to the chaos, dysfunction, and extremism that Donald Trump will visit upon the American people.
Now, something else to note here tonight that's also somewhat surprising, but not unusual in this really unusual political season, is that outside the debate hall, there's what's called the spin room, where advisors from both camps will try to spin reporters to insist that they won this debate. The Harris campaign has recruited two. Olivia Troy, she's a former top advisor to former Republican Vice President Mike Pence, and Anthony Scaramucci, who was the White House press secretary under Donald Trump, who survived 11 days. But two former Republicans going to be spinning for Harris tonight. So that is a very striking moment as this debate ends.
Yeah.
So ultimately, this is a big challenge. The challenge, I think, is higher for Kamala Harris tonight because she needs to present herself and articulate ideas and also how she's going to thread the needle, what she's going to align with under the Biden administration, and how she tries to chart her own course tonight. That's going to be interesting. Also going to be watching Donald Trump as well. Will he be more laid back tonight? And will he avoid the personal attacks? Something else to watch tonight. This is the first time these two will meet face to face. So will they even shake hands before this debate begins? There's no love lost between the two, as Paul noted. So that handshake or lack of a handshake will clearly set the tone. when they both take the stage tonight.
Really quickly, Richard, and I mean, I think a lot, that'll be the first shot that everyone's going to be watching there and see where it goes. Really quickly, some of the key issues that will come up tonight, some of the key issues that you think are going to be, will shift things in terms of, you know, the polls, voters.
Well, obviously, I think Trump is going to really try to deliver an economic message, focus on those economic anxieties, as I noted earlier, things like runaway inflation, the high cost of groceries. I suspect he's also going to lean in on immigration, calling out what he perceives as the Biden White House's lack of enforcement along the southern border. From the Harris perspective, she's going to try to contrast her positive vision versus what they call Trump's doom and gloom approach. I suspect she's going to go hard on protecting women's rights, particularly abortion access, things along those lines. She's going to articulate her policies to help middle-class voters. As we've been saying throughout, this is a divided country. No matter what happens tonight, about half the country is going to say that Harris won, half the country is going to say that Trump won. There's that little sliver of undecided voters who are up for grabs, and both Harris and Trump are going to try to tailor their message directly to those undecideds.
Indeed, a lot to watch here, including that handshake if it happens right off the top there. Richard, thank you so much for the CBC's Richard Madden for us in Washington. Okay, well, on the night of the debate between Donald Trump and President Joe Biden, we spoke to a recent university graduate majoring in political science and public policy. Before that debate, Audrey Porter was still an undecided voter. She hoped the debate would help her decide which candidate to support. Take a listen.
Just seeing how they do, this is the first time we've seen both of them talk together in quite some time and debate in this format. So it'll definitely help me see who's able to perform better under pressure.
All right, speaking of that performance, certainly that debate was pivotal in the campaign. Joe Biden's poor performance and eventual withdrawal opened the door for Kamala Harris to step in and become Donald Trump's new opponent. Audrey Porter joins us once again to see what has changed since then. Audrey, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
You were listening, I know, to the various conversations that we've been having over the course of the show. When we spoke to you last time, you were still remained undecided. Things have shifted a little bit for you. Give us an update in terms of where your mindset right now is, and I guess the importance of this particular debate for you.
Absolutely. Well, back when we first spoke in June, it was just a completely different race. Kamala Harris has stepped into that position. So I think for a lot of Americans, even people that weren't undecided, just the entire momentum of the campaign has shifted. I think one of the biggest things we're seeing is hope. That seems to be a big theme being pushed by the Harris Walz campaign. So I think that's definitely something I'm hoping to see tonight. I'm also hoping to see her talk about some of her policies. I know she just recently published that plan, so it'll be great to see her present that to the American people.
Is there anything that you're concerned about with regards to Kamala Harris? A lot of people already know sort of where things stand regarding Donald Trump, but as you're now looking at a new candidate, a potential one that you could be voting for, are there concerns?
There's definitely concerns. I mean, there's always concerns, especially at this high stakes. So I think just seeing her perform, this is the first time she'll be up going against Donald Trump in a debate like this, first time she'll be at this high of a level. So seeing how she performs under that pressure, it'll just be the first time we're going to see that. Two specific policy things I would love to see her touch on are immigration and the economy. I think those will be big things. Immigration obviously will be a hot topic for both of them, but seeing her have a humane and also effective approach to that is something I'm really looking forward to hearing from her.
What about for Donald Trump?
You know, I think for him, a lot of people think he's going to come with a strategy similar to how he did with Joe Biden. I think if he's able to get away from that and maybe not be as harsh or as name calling towards Kamala Harris, I think it will show undecided voters a different side to him, one that can get things done and one that has new policy ideas that maybe people can get behind, especially with things like immigration. So seeing him take that approach, if he chooses to tonight, I think will be a big benefit. If not, I definitely think it could hurt his campaign moving forward.
I know you've been really active, you know, getting involved, talking to a number of people. We know that the young vote is also really critical in this election. What are the conversations that you are having with your peers, with your friends, with family members in terms of getting a sense of where the pulse is? Some are saying, you know, when we spoke with her, Katie Simpson, who was out in Charlotte, North Carolina, and said the mood and the feel there was similar to what it was like in 2008 with Barack Obama. You know, Kamala Harris is bringing some of that energy in there. What are you talking about? Is there some of that energy that you're feeling? What are people saying to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was very young when Obama first was elected, but that's what a lot of people seem to be talking about. And now my generation is feeling that for the first time. A lot of Republicans have come out in support of Kamala Harris. I'm a registered Republican, but this will likely be my second time voting Democrat for the Oval Office ticket. Just seeing hope, energy. People are excited now. That wasn't the case a few months ago, especially when Joe Biden was still in the race after his debate performance, but now that's completely shifted. People are excited. They're looking forward to voting for Kamala Harris.
You mentioned that you are a registered Republican. What shifted you over to vote Democrat?
I think some of the concerns, a lot of people will mention Project 2025, but just some of the more conservative, extreme views that Donald Trump and some of his supporters have pushed is something we want to get away from. And I also think national unity. I think moving forward, this country needs to come back together. Democrats and Republicans need to be able to sit down at the table and get things done. And I think Kamala Harris will be the better candidate for that.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that. I know Kamala Harris was asked about this as to whether or not she would have any Republicans, I guess, she's sort of in her, constituency, in her Congress or whatnot, working together with her. What your thoughts on that here, where she's in fact has mentioned and talked about that crossover?
Yeah, I think that's a huge benefit for Republicans who are wanting to see more presence in the Oval Office if Donald Trump is not elected. So seeing that she's willing to work together, I think that's something that Trump could touch on tonight. If he comes out and says, I also want to do that and have a similar plan, that could be a huge benefit to him. But I'm not sure if we're going to be seeing that from him tonight.
So have you made a decision, or is this debate really going to be the weighing factor perhaps for you in deciding which way you're going to vote come November?
I think we're around 30% of Americans say this debate will mean something to them tonight. I think I fall right into that area. I would say I'm about 90% sure I'll be voting for Kamala Harris. But if it comes down to it, and she doesn't perform like we think she will tonight, I'll have to reassess. But as for right now, I would say I'm pretty locked in for Kamala Harris in November.
Okay, it's interesting. Great chatting with you, Audrey, and sort of seeing what that shift has been over the last 20 days since the last debate to where we are now and what we're going to anticipate tonight. Good speaking with you. Audrey Porter is an undecided voter, is a recent graduate from Oregon State University, where she majored in political science and public policy. Great speaking with you, Audrey.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to continue on here. Break down now the strategies for both candidates ahead of this pivotal debate. Our panel, Mo Vela is a former senior advisor to Joe Biden while he was vice president. He joins us now from Providence, Rhode Island. Matt Terrell also joins us. Matt is a Republican strategist and managing partner at Firehouse Strategies. He joins us from Washington. Mo, Matt, great to have you both here on Canada Tonight. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Angie.
Mo, I want to start with you first. We've talked about, this is not unfamiliar ground for Donald Trump. This will be his 7th general election debate. For Kamala Harris, though, it is still somewhat unfamiliar ground. That's not to say that she's not a debater. She certainly is. But technically, this is her first, this will be her first debate as, potential president here. Walk us through what she will need to do. How is she going to compensate with one may say for lack of experience being in this specific position here, but she needs to really stand out.
Yeah, good to be with you again, Angie. Thank you for having me. And Matt, it's a pleasure to be on with you. Let me say this, Angie. I think that her prosecutorial background, her years and experience and expertise as a prosecutor are going to come in extremely handy tonight. I think if I was advising her, I would advise her to rely on those instincts. She knows how to go after a target. She knows how to build a narrative and a message for an audience, whether it be a jury or in this case, 50 million Americans and millions others around the world. And so she knows how to do all that. I think she has the most to gain tonight, but she also has the most to lose tonight. Donald Trump has never received more than 47% of the vote in the United States. Many people believe he can't break that number. If that's the case, then she's got the most to gain. But like I said, she also has the most to lose tonight as well, Angie.
Yeah, there's a lot that people are going to be focusing on in terms of what she's going to say, how she's going to be presenting herself. Shifting over now to Donald Trump, and Matt, over to you. Again, he's no stranger to the debate, but certainly things are going to be different. He's not going to be debating, Joe Biden, like we saw in the last debate, of course. Kamala Harris comes with, as Mo points out, a level of experience. She is the younger candidate. She comes to the stage with a number of firsts, being the first Black woman of Black and South Asian descent here. So is this going to be a challenge for him? What is he going to need to do in order for him to sort of continue the rallied support, but then pull in those who, may be on the fence?
Yeah, look, just focus on the policies. And while he may not be debating President Biden tonight, he is debating Vice President Harris, as we all know, and she's been a part of the Biden-Harris administration. So for him, it's less about personalities tonight and focusing on inflation, namely affordability, particularly on housing, food and fuel and healthcare. Talk about border security and talk about crime. Those are the issues that resonate with those voters out there nationwide, particularly those who are undecided in this election. It may be that roughly 50 million Americans, maybe even more, will be paying attention to this debate tonight. But this election could come down to only 50,000 voters, give or take, in key states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. And what do they care about? Inflation, border security, and crime. So tonight, what former President Trump needs to do is talk about those issues, demonstrate message discipline, and draw contrast on his record on those issues in comparison to the Biden-Harris record on those issues. That's how he's going to win over those independent, undecided voters. It's his best path forward to win this debate tonight and win this election.
Mo, what about Kamala Harris? What is she going to need to do to really appeal to those undecided voters? What's the message that she needs to be putting forward to get across to them, to sway them? We also know, of course, she's going to be, looking at the younger voter as well, maybe even the first-time voter.
Yeah, I think she needs to set the record straight. I appreciate Matt's, talking points and what the Republicans are doing with the talking points. But the reality is that crime is down. That the reality is that under Donald Trump, we actually created the least amount of jobs in any modern presidency versus Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. If you want to attach her to Joe Biden, let's focus on what they have accomplished too. You can't just make up things. Crime is down. Border crossings are down 50%. And you can just keep going. And I think she has to remind the people that they can come at you that way. But the fact of the matter is I've served in the White House twice under two vice presidents of the United States, and I understand the role of the vice presidency. The vice president has a boss. They're called president. And so you can try to attach her all day long, and that's a wonderful talking point. The reality is that the final decisions were not hers. She needs to distinguish herself tonight on how she would do things differently than Joe Biden has. And she has to very succinctly share with the American people what her vision is for the future of our nation and our democracy.
Matt, I'm going to come back to you on that. As you pointed out, the issues that Donald Trump needs to be putting forward. Kamala Harris, I think Mo is pointing out, she's going to come there on that stage showing that she's the boss. Donald Trump goes to the podium and expresses himself as the boss, but is he going to need to pivot or shift in any which way to show that not only he's focused on the issues, but he's coming there as the leader, as the boss, if you will, to lead the American people?
Yeah, look, for former President Trump, he needs to show up tonight and really just focus on the policies that the American people care about. What he needs to do is make this debate about the American people and talk about inflation, talk about affordability, talk about border security, and crime, and contrast his record on those key issues with the Biden-Harris administration's record, namely on Vice President Harris's record on those issues. So the key for him tonight is really focusing on the policies that many Americans are focused in on, particularly those independent, undecided voters are going to decide this election. Again, this election may be decided by just as little as 50,000 voters, maybe 100,000 voters, but the GOP base, they're fired up for President Trump. He doesn't need to speak to them tonight. The Democrat base, they're fired up for Vice President Harris. She doesn't need to speak to them tonight. They're going to turn out likely. It comes down to those independent, undecided voters. And what do they care about? Affordability, the economy, border security, crime. That if President Trump is talking about those issues tonight, this would be a good night for former President Trump. If he's talking about personalities and other things, that's not going to be as good as a night. This is a moment to reach out to those independent, undecided voters who will be paying attention tonight.
Yeah, it's going to
Angie, if I could just throw one more thing in there. I think one thing that Mr. Terrell, with all due respect, is leaving out very conveniently is the women of this nation, they care about having the right to determine what is done with their own body. So reproductive rights and reproductive health care are going to be a very huge issue. I expect that she will bring that front and center. There is a reason she's leading among women in this country by double digits. And I think, you can talk about crime, it's down dramatically. Again, you want to contrast it? That'll be fun for her because the numbers are in her favor. Immigration, 50% less border crossings. So I say, you know what, if that's their plan, bring it on. It's going to be fun to watch her just continuously refute, and with data, with truth, with facts.
Really
Boom,
quickly,
boom, boom.
really quickly from both of you, if I can. We're out of time here, but I want to step on that point there, Mo, of the female voter. It's anticipated more women are going to be voting in this election. The hope was that was going to happen during Hillary Clinton's time. It didn't necessarily, but if it happens this time around in this debate with women listening now for both of you, what are they each candidate going to need to do to get that vote? Mo, you said your points there, but Matt?
Yeah, look, I think inflation, border security, crime. I just think those are the issues that drive this race, particularly, again, for independent, undecided voters. And whether that's women voters who are independent and undecided or voters of different walks of life, what's really going to matter in this race are those voting blocks. They're going to decide this election. And, look, issues like abortion, absolutely voters care about that. There's no question about that. But if you look at the issues that are really driving the race, those top concerns, it is the economy, inflation, border security, and crime. And the candidate can demonstrate that they have a solid track record on those issues and can lead for the next 4 years in those issues. That's going to win over those voters. And again, the political bases they're going to turn out, it just comes down to roughly 45,000, 50,000 voters, maybe 100,000 voters. This is a small number of voters that these candidates will be speaking to tonight. The economy, inflation, border security, crime, I'm telling you, that's what's going to drive this race. That's what these candidates need to be focused on.
I hope he's right, Angie, because we win on those issues. They're all under control. All have dramatically been reduced under Biden and Harris. Bring it on, my friend.
The debate here has ended, but as we anticipate for the main debate to take place at 9 o'clock, I thank you both. That was former senior advisor to Joe Biden, Mo Vela in Providence, Rhode Island, and Republican strategist and managing partner at Firehouse Strategies, Matt Terrell, joining us from Washington. Gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, ahead of tonight's debate, polls are showing an extremely tight race, making what happens in Philadelphia even more important to undecided voters.
I'm a Republican, always voted Republican. Not sure this year.
I'm going to go with Trump regardless. I don't know enough about Kamala, and big deals with the border and the inflation is my main thing.
My hope is that they're going to tell us what they're going to do, not what the other person has done.
Hopefully she gets some tough questions and then can answer some questions, and maybe I can change my mind.
I want her to fact check him if she can, or challenge his untruths.
This is her chance to get her message out, to get her personality out there, and really to find out what her policies are.
And here's another look at Philadelphia this hour and the National Constitution Center. We just have about half an hour away from the highly anticipated debate. Former U.S. President Donald Trump and current Vice President Kamala Harris gearing up to face each other for the first time in the U.S. presidential election campaign. All right, let's throw things over to our chief correspondent, Adrienne Arsenault, for special coverage leading up to the debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Thanks, Angie. Some great conversations you had there. And thanks to all of you for joining us on what is sure to be an intense, a very interesting evening. As Angie said, we are just about 30 minutes away from Donald Trump and Kamala Harris meeting for their first U.S. presidential debate. In fact, this is also the first time they'll ever meet face to face. So much has led up to this moment. More than 8 years of combative political discourse, name-calling, blaming, court cases, and that dramatic last-minute Democratic candidate swap. The last presidential debate between Trump and Joe Biden proved just how important these moments are. Biden's poor performance pushed him right out of the race. So all eyes are on this stage at this debate with just 56 days to go. What do the candidates need to do? What do they need to not do? How do they make their case to the American public? Let's dive in. Now, neither Trump nor Harris is a stranger to debates, but tonight the stakes are sky high. So what do they need to prove? We have full coverage. Katie Simpson is standing by with voters in newly minted swing state, North Carolina. Paul Hunter is in crucial Pennsylvania. That's where the debate is being held tonight at the National Constitution Center. So, Paul, let's start with you. We are, of course, 29-ish minutes away now from it starting. First time they're meeting, such very different politicians in style and substance. So what's your sense of the difference in how they've been preparing?
Surprise, quite differently. Word from the Harris camp is that it's been quite intense. She's been holed up for days. They're both here now, obviously. She got here in Pennsylvania, or in Philadelphia yesterday. She'd been in Pittsburgh for 4 or 5 days ahead of that, rehearsing with people play acting Donald Trump and things like that. They wanted to sort of get her muscle memory going for anything that he might toss her way. Donald Trump, not so much. Yes, a little bit of that. He's getting advice on the kind of debater that she is, including from people who have debated Kamala Harris. But the reporting is that it was significantly less intense in terms of preparation for Trump. Mind you, he's a veteran at this kind of stuff, right? This is will be his 7th presidential debate. That's a record. This is Kamala Harris's first. So, not that she's a stranger to the debate stage, even as vice president, obviously. But very different styles, very different approaches. We'll see how it plays out tonight, obviously.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Paul. I always wonder if the line that, oh no, he's not, preparing very rigorously, if that isn't just another head game, right? As if to say he doesn't need to do this, but secretly, he is actually studying. We'll never know the truth.
Yeah, but on the other hand, for sure. But in fairness, he does not lack confidence,
correct,
right? So what we hear about that slight pullback in terms of intensity, it kind of fits with the image we have of him. You're right. We'll never know for sure. Could be head game, but it does fit the persona that he believes he knows what he's doing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you bet. In all debates, the rules of engagement certainly hotly contested by each candidate's camp. Format for tonight? Pretty much the same as it was in the ill-fated, for Joe Biden, debate back in June. No audience in the room. It's going to get straight to questions, 2 minutes per answer. You get a 2-minute rebuttal. The two candidates will not be allowed to ask each other questions. It's all got to go through the moderators. But the big one, think 2020. Think that vice presidential debate with Mike Pence when he sort of tried to overspeak when Kamala Harris was speaking. She said, I forget the exact quote, but something like, "Excuse me, I'm speaking," right? It became a viral moment from that debate. There's T-shirts in D.C. that have her picture on it and say, "Excuse me, I'm speaking." The Harris team were kind of hoping to initiate perhaps a moment like that. So they wanted the microphones left on, no matter who was speaking, in case she could goad, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Trump into speaking over her, looking like a bully, coming across as ugly, that might help her. The Trump team argued the opposite. No, we want him closed. You could argue because his team doesn't trust that he won't do that, perhaps. Like you said earlier, we'll never know. But in the end, the Trump team won that debate. The microphones will be off when the other, of the candidate who's not speaking will be off relative to the candidate who is speaking. So them's the rules. You never know what's going to happen. Trump is Trump. But as it stands, the microphones will be off when they're not talking. Okay, Paul, super briefly, very big question, though. With opinions so hardened, do these debates matter?
Yes. Back to you.
Okay.
This one especially so because the race is so tight, right? There aren't that many voters who haven't made up their minds, and there aren't that many states in play. So there's going to be 50, 55, 60 million people watching tonight. They're speaking to what they estimate about 40,000 voters in those 7 swing states that we keep talking about, those ones whose opinions can be swayed, right? This is all about entertainment on a certain level. People want to see the viral moment. They want to see the punch and the jab, but they also want to learn. Enough of the voters out there still want to learn, who is Kamala Harris really? What is she saying really? Can she win those voters over? You wonder about stakes and consequences. The White House is in the balance here if she can reach those voters. Conversely, if Trump can make those who are a little wary of him say, wait a minute, I'm okay for this job. I can be presidential. So there are votes in play here. So there are consequences with this debate.
Okay, good stuff. Paul Hunter, we will be talking again. So as we've said, this debate is happening in Philadelphia tonight, where Paul is, the biggest city in a very important state this election, Pennsylvania. Known as the Keystone State, Pennsylvania could indeed be the key to winning this election. It's one of 7 swing states, the others being Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. 8 years ago, in 2016, Donald Trump narrowly claimed it as a win. In 2020, Joe Biden turned it blue, but barely. And time is ticking for this election. Early in-person voting starts in Pennsylvania next week. All right, let's head over to Katie Simpson. Katie, you're with voters tonight in Charlotte, North Carolina. Why there? What are you hearing from people there?
Adrienne, you're never going to believe this. You're going to be so surprised. But we, right now, are in a bar. We are here for a debate watch party. Yeah, so everyone is so shocked. Let's show you around a little bit. So it is a party-like atmosphere. We've got the DJ set up over here spinning tunes. Noticeably, we heard Beyonce's Freedom, which is, of course, the song that Kamala Harris has sort of embraced as part of her campaign. We've got the big voting balloon wall. We've got a huge screen where the debate is going to be broadcast, and people are slowly trickling in. Much of this has been organized by a nonprofit group that is working to encourage more black and brown people in the state of North Carolina to vote. And so we've been chatting with voters here to get a better sense of what they are hoping to see tonight and what they think is at stake.
I'm watching for VP Harris to be able to clearly articulate all the ways in which she's going to change this country for the better. Because I believe that. I believe very, very firmly that she is the candidate to do that.
I think there's an open opportunity to talk about what middle America, I think there's 2 extremes of taxes for the wealthy and then government funding for, the lower privileged environments. And so, what are you going to do for middle income America, which is majority of America? So I'm very interested on that.
We need to address some serious, things that are going on, reproductive rights. That's heavy. Let's speak about that. Let's speak about climate control. Let's speak about what we're going to do to help the middle class.
Some of the people that we've spoken with here tonight, they are rooting for Kamala Harris. They want this to be a standout moment for her. Earlier today, we've actually been in North Carolina for a few days. We actually spent some time in the rural counties that largely vote Republican. While there's a lot of excitement for Democrats in this moment, we're also seeing some energy, enthusiasm for Donald Trump, and voters there hoping that he returns to the White House.
So aside from the tunes, Katie, it's so interesting to see you there because North Carolina hasn't always been a swing state. It is this time around. How come?
It is. So the vote has been really, really close a number of years, but traditionally it has been a Republican-held state. The exception is 08 when Obama won, and so Democrats think there is an opportunity in this moment. They see that Donald Trump is a polarizing figure. They are hoping that Kamala Harris is the top Democratic ticket, that they can mobilize those voters. But because the race is so close here, and it's just recently become so close. A couple months ago, when Joe Biden was still the nominee, Joe Biden was trailing Donald Trump rather significantly, but that has changed now that Kamala Harris is at the top of the ticket. She's actually coming here on Thursday to do some in-person campaigning. That's how important this state is.
All right, Katie Simpson, we'll be with you again later tonight. So Joe Biden's withdrawal saw a surge in voter registration. And according to the nonpartisan voter engagement organization, Vote.org, more than 376,000 people have registered since Biden handed the reins to Kamala Harris. Vote.org says over 1 million new voters have registered through its site this election cycle. It's about 17% of them are coming from 7 swing states where the 2020 race was decided by razor-thin margins. So who are these new voters? Well, it seems 83% of the new registrations are by people aged 18 to 34. That could be a boon for Harris, with signs of growing enthusiasm among young Americans since she launched her bid. So still lots of work ahead to convince voters. We have plenty of evidence of how both Trump and Harris debate. What could past performance tell us about what tactics they might employ tonight? Ellen Morrow has been digging into the tape for us and talking to experts. So, Ellen, can we start with Kamala Harris? Arguably, she is facing the most pressure tonight, right? Big expectations for her. She's still fairly new Democratic candidate.
That's right. The spotlight, the bulk of the pressure, as you said, will be on Kamala Harris tonight. And there's one big reason for that. Americans know what they're getting when it comes to Donald Trump. They know what to expect, whether they like it or not. But when it comes to Kamala Harris, in polling, anecdotally in our own reporting, many Americans say they just don't have a great sense of her yet, about what she's about, what she would be like as president. So this is her biggest chance to introduce herself to tens of millions of American voters and to make her case to those rare, key, crucial, undecided voters in those undecided states. So, or in those swing states. So no pressure, right? So a big moment for her. It is her biggest political debate test, but she has had big debate moments before. She has had big moments on Capitol Hill. We've been looking at those and, as you said, talking to experts about what to expect.
So it's very clear that this debate is about defining who she is. She needs to define who she is. Donald Trump wants to define who she is. What sort of pressure is on him? I mean, it's clear that the spotlight is squarely on her, but what kind of expectations are there for him?
Well, the experts that we talked to said the bar is just lower for Donald Trump. Again, that goes back to the fact that people know what to expect. So if he says something that's offensive or really out there, that's kind of baked into Americans' perceptions. But his mission tonight is going to be trying to blame Kamala Harris for the things that Americans are upset about, namely inflation and the economy. And again, we've been looking at old tape of Donald Trump and talking to experts, and we can play some of that for you.
So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
Kamala Harris has staked her campaign on the contrast of her background as prosecutor versus Donald Trump, convicted felon. Harris is known as a tough debater, able to seize the spotlight and create a viral moment. Remember this from the vice presidential debate in 2020.
He will not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year.
He said he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Well, wait.
I'm speaking.
And as a senator, Harris brought her courtroom skills to Capitol Hill.
Can you think of any laws that give government the power to make decisions about the male body?
She's battle tested, she's strong, she's defiant. She's going to tell the world tonight why she is ready to carry the torch from Joe Biden.
But now she faces her toughest test against an unpredictable and experienced opponent, just as polls suggest her momentum may be slowing.
She only has this one opportunity to introduce herself and at the same time make the closing arguments. And so it's a lot to do and a lot of obstacles in the way of doing it successfully.
One, Harris will need to claim successes of the Biden administration while showing how her presidency would be different. And she'll have to account for her own shifting policy positions.
If he's able to push her in a corner and try to explain why she made those changes, and if those answers are not adequate, I think that's going to play to his benefit.
She's not a good debater. She's not a smart person. She doesn't want to debate.
Donald Trump has spent the weeks leading up to the debate launching personal attacks at his opponent. Some analysts say expect more of that tonight.
If he avoids insults, it will be a first in his lifetime. It's the way he's built. You know what? There's nothing smart about you, Joe.
Trump has also been criticized for using debates to amplify false claims.
As far as the ballots are concerned, it's a disaster. He doesn't want to senator.
And remember this moment from 2020.
The question is, radical left. Will you shut up, man?
Part of the reason the mics will be muted tonight. Trump's unpredictability, some analysts say, makes him a formidable opponent, able to rile and derail.
He can be reserved and presidential and above the fray and subdued, but also, be vicious on the offense if he is attacked.
Trump is set to blame Kamala Harris for what Republicans argue are the failures of the Biden administration.
These people are stupid people that are running our country.
From rising inflation to pressure on the southern border. Polls suggest voters favor Trump on those key issues that have dominated much of the campaign.
He's already got the upper hand in the election. The underlying issues of this race favor Republicans in the swing states with the swing voters. That's who Trump's going to talk to.
And that's what Republican strategists want him to do. They don't necessarily want those big personal attacks because they do feel like they have a real argument to make on those policy points around immigration and the economy, which polls show are the two key issues for voters. So that's what they want to see. Whether we will see that or a more unrestrained version of Donald Trump, who knows? But Republicans know that the polls appear to have tightened in recent days, going back to a neck-and-neck race, whereas Harris had a slight lead, according to some polls. They don't want anything tonight to change that because, remember, one debate already upended this entire race, and this debate will set up how the race is talked about in the weeks ahead.
And I guess there's always what the Republican strategists want to have happen and what the candidate wants to have happen. So we'll see. Really good tape. Thank you very much, Ellen. Appreciate that. So let's turn now to some other very smart people who will be paying close attention tonight. Former CNN editor-at-large Chris Cillizza, who is in Northern Virginia, and Tia Mitchell, Atlanta Journal-Constitution D.C. correspondent, is on the ground at the debate in Philadelphia. I love it that Tia is always on the ground, so I really appreciate that. Chris, if I can start with you, though, Donald Trump's 7th presidential debate, more than any nominee in history. I mean, I presume based on that alone, people are probably looking at him as the favorite winner in this debate?
Well, I would say that. So experience matters. And I'd also say, as your correspondent noted earlier, expectations are pretty low for him. He's gotten away with saying and doing things that no politician would get away with saying or doing in this country many times before, including in debates. So it's sort of hard for me to imagine that Donald Trump would say something that would sort of shock people at this point, though I rule nothing out. So, yeah. I mean, I think there is a little bit more pressure on Harris, mostly because she's a much less well-known figure to the public. She is the vice president, obviously, but I don't think people know all that much about her. But it's also an opportunity, right? I think there's plenty of people who are either on the fence or maybe loosely for Donald Trump who might be able to be pried away from that view if Kamala Harris can say, look, I'm not some wacko liberal. I'm not Joe Biden's puppet. I'm sort of my own person, and I'm going to show you that I'm more moderate than this character of me that Donald Trump is trying to paint.
So, Tia, we're talking about the same rules as the first debate. Many thought that would have favored Joe Biden. I mean, clearly it didn't. That debate was a disaster for him. So at this point, who has the advantage with this, particularly when we talk about the microphones?
So I think Joe Biden and his team initially thought that muting Trump would help by encouraging Trump not to be such an interrupter and a disruptor, and by focusing on the answers to the questions and not any back and forth or side comments. Well, that did not serve Biden well, because we know his answers weren't great. His delivery wasn't great. His energy wasn't great that night. And I think in retrospect, Harris's team thought that by muting Mike, it allowed, we've been talking, there have been articles about what they call shame washing Trump, is what some people have described it, letting some of his more controversial or problematic impulses literally be muted. So I think that the muting does help Trump. That being said, I think if Harris's team is smart, they found ways to take advantage of the muting, or thought of how they could take advantage of the muting in the same way that Biden thought he could have in June. He didn't, but now Harris is going to have to work in that same atmosphere and try to use it to her advantage. For example, if Trump does make side conversations, it could be Harris who tries to elevate or bring to light things he said when he was muted. It could also be used by Harris to push forward with her answers in ways that Trump won't like, but he won't have the platform to respond in ways he might have if he weren't muted. We'll see.
You know, it's interesting when I hear you talk to you about what is expected of Kamala Harris, and then I hear you talk, Chris, about what's expected of Donald Trump. It's like there's a bar for Donald Trump, and then there's like a bar for Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
You know, Trump has been.
I mean,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you're exactly right. I mean, the thing that is so hard about covering Donald Trump is he is judged by the electorate as a celebrity, not a politician. Even though he is a politician, he's been president of the United States. That bar is much lower in terms of what they're willing to accept. Harris and Biden and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Mitt Romney and literally any other politician you can think of is judged as a politician. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think it's really challenging for anyone against Donald Trump. I thought we saw this with Hillary Clinton. We saw it with Joe Biden. And not to mention the fact, and we should mention this, look, this is a visual medium, right? Donald Trump is a white guy who we've had 45 presidents, 44 of them have been white men. We've never had we've never had a woman of South Asian descent or a black woman like Kamala Harris as president. And, you know, I think that matters too. There's history here. I think people do sometimes, and they shouldn't, but I think we've seen this happen. They judge women by a different standard when it comes to debates. We saw it in 2016. So I don't think we should be immune from those factors, because remember, the first thing that people do is look with their eyes. They listen too, but this is a performance in a lot of ways. It's a big television performance, and what people look like and what they sound like matters.
And when we see them in the boxes, right, because they can't speak over each other with those muted mics, but their faces are going to be doing a lot of work. So you're right, people will be looking. Tia, you know, Trump has been accused of, I mean, we've seen it, hurling derogatory comments at women, has posted misogynistic memes on Truth Social. Sometimes that hurts him, sometimes it really doesn't. And I'm curious what your sense is of how he balances what to do about women and about a female opponent tonight.
Yeah, I think that if Trump is as disciplined as he was in that debate in June, we shouldn't expect those kind of attacks in this medium. Trump usually saves most of his vitriol for social media, so to speak. That being said, I wonder what will happen if the moderators ask him about some of those problematic comments. You know, when he was interviewed by NABJ and he was just asked about the things he said about Black women, he immediately got defensive, went on the attack of the questioners, and went on to say even more problematic things about Vice President Harris. So sometimes when he's prompted, his answers even on those controversial statements aren't great. You know, because there isn't a way to explain some of the awful things he said. So I think the biggest risk for Trump is not that he volunteers those type of statements. I think he's probably a little bit better trained than that. Mm-hmm. But what happens if he's prompted about those statements? How does he plan to address it? And will the moderators bring it up at all?
Chris, if you forgive me here, because Tia is in the spin room, I got to ask her just for one last question, what the vibe is like there, because I remember last time, Tia, the spin room for the Biden-Trump debate, you said it was like funereal there. What is the feeling like where you are right now?
So it was interesting. Earlier in the spin room, initially, there were a lot of Republican surrogates, Governor Nome, Congressman Donald, Senator Rubio, and then not long before I joined you guys, the Democrats started showing up, and folks like Governor Newsom, for example. And so, but we're pre-debate. I think, again, post-debate, in that Atlanta debate, the Democrats did not come to the spin room. They did not really, the surrogates chose not to try to address or explain what happened. We'll see what kind of night Trump and Harris have, and therefore what kind of energy and, quite frankly, quantity of surrogates shows up in the spin room. But I'll be right here to talk about it.
Oh, I can't wait to find out what's going on. Chris Cillizza, Tia Mitchell, as always, thanks very much, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are about if my math is right, and I think it's okay, we're about 5.5 minutes from the beginning of the debate. There are, if we step back here, about more than 6 million eligible voters who live outside the United States. And with these razor-thin margins in those crucial swing states, those votes can and will make a difference. Lots of those voters live right here in Canada, including Alexander Marino, a member of Republican Overseas, and Laura Allen, a member of Democrats Abroad. Kind of both of you to join us. And Alex, I wonder, can you help me out here? Can you walk us through the mechanics of how you vote abroad? I get your vote, for example, will be cast effectively in the swing state of Pennsylvania. How does that process look?
Yeah, so each state has its own electoral laws. We are the United States of America, and all 50 states have their own rules. But in my home state, of the Keystone State, you have to register first. You have to be on the roll call, and that can be done online or it can be done through the mail. Once you're registered, Pennsylvania then reaches out and provides you with the actual absentee ballot, which is emailed or mailed, and they go out this week. Then there are specific instructions in reference to that ballot, how to fill it out, where to fill it out, how to seal it, very specific in reference to keeping the integrity of the ballot, for which you mail in and hope for the best.
Okay, this is not the simplest of processes. Is it the same for you, Laura? I mean, I guess you're voting abroad in New York State, effectively.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, it is a very similar process. So essentially, it's making sure that you are registered to vote, and then making sure you request your absentee ballot from your local Board of Elections or votefromabroad.org. Once that ballot comes to you, you want to make sure you fill that out. For me, I'll be voting for Vice President Kamala Harris. And then you want to mail that back as soon as possible, just to make sure that every single vote counts.
Is it for Canadians who might be dual citizens living, or Americans who are living here who aren't sure if they're registered? Do they have time to register now? Alex?
Yes, they do. I mean, every state has their own deadline, but Pennsylvania, you can still go on as of this evening, register to be put on the roll call and receive your ballots. So again, I can't stress it enough that every state has its own rules, but absolutely in Pennsylvania right now.
So I know it can be difficult sometimes to engage voters in the United States. I mean, voter turnout always tells us an interesting story. I'm assuming it might also be a bit harder to get those outside the country to be engaged. So I'm curious what you're hearing from your fellow Americans living in Canada. Are you noticing anything different, Laura, for example, this election from past ones?
In terms of fellow Americans living in Canada, we are deeply concerned about the future of democracy. So I am hearing an urgency with this particular election. We know that a lot is at stake, and we want to make sure that we protect our democracy here. So I believe that many of us are energized, but we are concerned, and that's why we are making sure to do everything we can to get out the vote and talk to our fellow Americans living in Canada.
Okay, we're 2.5 minutes away, by the way, from the start of this debate. So, Alex, while I have you still here, I think we all understand that we aren't watching what's about to happen here just out of curiosity, that what happens in the United States reverberates very loudly here. So as someone living in this country, is there something policy-wise, Alex, you're going to be listening for?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I were to give any advice to President Trump in this debate, I would hit home on the three cornerstones of what the kitchen table issues, as I call them: the economy, immigration, and Kamala Harris's inability to land on a topic and her flip-flopping back and forth. 4 years ago, this is a very unique election in that 4 years ago, we actually got to see what it was like under one of the candidates, and the previous 4 years before that, we got to see what it's like under that candidate. So we have a good idea who and what these individuals are. And people remember what it was like in 2016 to 2020 to go to the grocery store and not feel mugged when they walked out, to be able to afford their rent, their mortgage, to be able to get those little extras, which under a Harris-Biden administration just hasn't been a reality. Immigration has been a disaster. Like it or not, she was the border czar. 12 million plus illegal aliens, along with drugs and criminals, have been eating away at resources that Americans, tax-paying Americans, should be used, and oftentimes in our low-income minority communities. And then, quite frankly, this is a candidate that when they do let her out of the basement, Joe Biden style, 2020, she doesn't take questions. She doesn't do interviews. Her puff piece for CNN lasted all of 16 minutes, and they had the lifeguard in Tim Wall sitting next to her to make sure she didn't drown. We need to hold her feet to the fire, and we need to see what her issues are.
Okay, Alex, I got to cut you off here because we've got to give Laura a chance to jump in here. We've got 30 seconds before the debate starts. Go ahead, Laura.
Absolutely. Vice President Harris has been working, so she may not be as much in the media as Donald Trump because she's actually taking time to work for the American people. We know that she is one of the most qualified people to ever run for President of the United States, and we're looking forward to voting her in.
As a voter in Pennsylvania, I want to hear her come down on fracking. I'd love